What I love to do is introduce the right people to the right people.
I assemble the smartest people I can think of or reach out to carry that conversation, and that's exactly what I've done today.
Please give my panel a round of applause. Welcome.
Okay guys, Jay Martin here, CEO of Cambridge House, and I'm joined right now by Greg Bose, the CEO and Director of Northern Graphite. Greg, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Considering the times we live in, very well.
Yeah, good to hear. Look, I'm really excited to have you on the show and dive into this story and dive into the commodity because we haven't covered the graphite sector on my channel yet. You know, we've talked a ton about the EV revolution, a ton about different ways to play the renewable energy trend. But we've also kept it pretty high level and really just focused on copper, a little bit of nickel. So I'm excited to dive into the graphite sector with you. And I want to start there just with the macro, Greg. Graphite's a bit of a sleeper and hasn't gotten a lot of attention from the media, from the markets, which is kind of crazy when you look at the amount of graphite required per electric vehicle and some serious supply issues that we're facing. So let's start there. If you could give my audience the high level, where are we at right now with graphite supply and demand?
Sure. You're in the right place because we were the original new graphite company about 10 years ago. So I think we've been doing this longer than anybody. And we pride ourselves in taking a very professional and analytical approach to the industry and avoiding a lot of the hype that often surrounds junior companies. If I could go all the way back to 2012, we started the company because of lithium-ion batteries and EVs, and we were way too early. But we were spectacularly successful for the wrong reason. The commodity super cycle growth in China, all that good stuff. Shares went from 15 cents to 340. But unfortunately, graphite's day in the sun didn't last that long because the Chinese economy slowed down. And we've had this long hiatus where we're waiting for the promise of EVs and lithium-ion batteries to affect demand. And you're absolutely right. Graphite has been the poor cousin, if you will, of the battery minerals. There's a few reasons for that. One of the main ones would be that unlike cobalt and lithium, most of the production comes from China. So you don't have the same kind of transparency and knowledge of the space that there is in other minerals. There has also been a surplus of production capacity from China. So even though lithium-ion demand has been growing rapidly, we haven't yet seen the price effect that lithium and cobalt have seen. Lithium a couple times, actually. I think it's on its third wave. We're still waiting for our second wave from 2012. But, it's kind of inevitable that if you believe EV demand forecasts or production forecasts from the automakers themselves, not just what the junior companies are saying, there's definitely going to be a crossover point in the not too distant future where demand overtakes supply and that excess capacity in China gets used up. And as you know well, there's nothing that creates excitement in the junior sector more than rising prices. And that has been probably the single biggest barrier to holding graphite back and graphite companies back.
Yeah. And more in conversations that we're having on this channel, for sure, investors are more concerned, as they should be, when it comes to domestic supply, right? Right now, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, you know better than I would. Canada is 100% reliant on Chinese supply for graphite. Is that right?
Not quite. There is one graphite mine in North America. It's a relatively small mine, 15,000 tons a year in Quebec. Okay. It's getting near the end of its life, and it's owned by a big international French company, actually. That's the only production in North America, and there's a small amount of production in Europe. So basically, and obviously none in South Korea or Japan. So basically, the West, if you will, is entirely dependent on Chinese graphite production. There is some comes from Brazil as well, but it's mainly China.
Right. Yeah, I should have said Canada and the US. We're both up in Canada, but actually the majority of my viewers are American. So glad we touched on that. So talk to me about the numbers a little bit. I think it's something like 25 to 100 kilograms per graphite required for electric vehicles today. Are we on the money there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. A big car like a Tesla Model S, for example, might have more than 100 kilograms rather, but a smaller one might have 25, and a hybrid may only have a couple. But the automobile market is so large. I think there's 100 million new cars sold every year. That even a small penetration into that, 5 or 6%, and we're already at a couple. You multiply that by 50 or 60 kilograms per car, and all of a sudden you're quickly talking about very spectacular kind of numbers. And the battery minerals markets, all of them, lithium, cobalt, graphite, are relatively small. Yeah. So there is going to be a big leverage effect, if you will. The people that forecast these things are basically saying we need multiples of current world graphite production by 2025 or 2030. And no graphite mines are currently under construction outside of China. None. Yeah,
that's wild when you think about it like that. Now, what do we know about deposit distribution? Are there deposits that could be built out, Greg, in North America that you know of? And then we're going to get into the Bissett Creek deposit that you guys own in Ontario. But what are we looking at in terms of North American supply?
Sure. The graphite market is not well covered from a research perspective. In fact, the junior companies, in fact, it's not covered at all. But we do an extensive amount of analysis ourselves. And I can tell you that there are approximately 20 feasibility level graphite projects outside of China. There's probably a couple more by now since I last compiled that list. But of those 20, 14 are in Africa, and some of them are in countries where you would not want to go and do your due diligence trip. So when you talk about supply in politically stable countries, you may or may not want to include those. It's also important to remember that not every graphite deposit is what I would call battery grade. So that's fairly difficult for the average investor to determine. But just because there's 20 doesn't mean there's 20 that could come on stream. So in North America, there are four feasibility level advanced stage projects. And that's important because, PEAs are PEAs, and there's often a substantial difference between a PEA and a feasibility study. A lot more work goes into the feasibility study, obviously. So there's us, Nouveau Monde, Focus Graphite, and Mason Graphite, basically just four. The other three are in Quebec, and we're in Ontario.
Okay, now let's dive into Northern Graphite's project a little bit. So the reason I wanted to have you on the show, like I said, we haven't showcased any graphite. We're pretty particular with the companies we have on here. I was introduced to Northern Graphite by your shareholder base. Specifically, a couple of your investors called me and said, have a look at Northern Graphite, introduced me to you. I love the jurisdiction. We're in Southern Ontario, predictable, proven, secure, mining friendly, great track record. You guys own 100% of the project. Talk to me about the project. What should investors focus on? And then we'll get into location and all this.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head with the first one, location. It's basically between North Bay and Ottawa. For your U.S. Listeners who may not know exactly where that is, we're about 4.5 hours drive north of Toronto or west of Montreal. So we are in the southern part of Canada. And that's very important from a cost perspective because labor, equipment, supplies, everything. If you're in Africa, or in northern Canada for that matter. It all has to be shipped there. We're a couple hours from Sudbury, which is a major mining center. So location. We don't have to build a camp for the workers. They can live in nearby towns. 5 hours from the Port of Montreal. Battery plants in the US, we would be 10 hours by truck transport. You compare that to a mine in Africa, which has to get the product to the coast, put it on a ship, go across the ocean, take it off the ship, put it on a truck, and you know the story. So location is a big part of it. A second one is flake size, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated for investors, because one of the big differences between base and precious metals and industrial minerals is that with precious metals, for example, or base metals, everybody's product is the same and everybody gets the same price. That's not true with industrial minerals. Prices vary widely by quality. And in the case of graphite, one of the big determinants is the size of the little graphite flakes that are produced. We're not talking about potato chips here. We're talking about sand or pepper or parsley or something of that nature. But anyway, there's a substantial difference between small flake prices and very large flake prices. And an independent study by Benchmark Minerals Intelligence ranked our project as having the highest margin of any existing producer or development project in the world. And that's largely because we have the best flake size distribution. So, as I said, quality matters, and we are at the top of the food chain. So that's a very nice place to be. The other big advantage it gives us is that we can start with a mine that's 25,000 tons a year of concentrate production. That's a nice size to fit into the existing market. Start small. Almost every graphite mine has a large resource, so where you start is more a function of management strategy than it is the size of the resource, as it would be in other minerals. So we can start at 25,000. It's very profitable, large flake, targeting industrial markets, and expand as the market grows and switch to the battery market when the economics improve. A lot of our peers are modeling much bigger projects aimed at the battery market. Those projects will be needed in the future, but right now they're not. If you produced 100,000 tons a year, the market is only 850,000 tons. You would cause prices to go down and you'd have trouble selling it. So it would be hard to convince anybody to give you the money to do that right now. But we can start at 25 and very reasonable capital cost, 85 to 90 million US, be in production, build our customer base, and then expand as the market grows. So that's where our strategy differs from a lot of our peers.
Yeah. Now, Simon Moore is a individual who I follow at Benchmark Minerals and one of the more respected firms when it comes to research in this space. So that should catch people's attention that they've called you out as being the highest margin in the business. I want to get back to to flake size for a minute, Greg. If you could assist my audience in, as best you can, simplifying how they can validate flake size, because I'm sure, too many companies are going to come out and say, we're large flake, but what should investors be looking for to validate that statement or not?
It's not that difficult. In theory, the companies are only supposed to be saying, according to 43101, what has been verified by an independent expert. So really the go-to firm in the graphite metallurgical business is SGS Lakefield. They do analysis of assaying, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, most graphite companies, and SGS has probably done the metallurgy and flow sheet development for 30 graphite deposits around the world. We were the first and helped educate them. They helped educate us at the same time. So most people send their samples of their ore to SGS. SGS crushes it, grinds it, separates the flakes, and gives them a report on what came out in terms of flake size. So if they've got a representative sample of the deposit and they've got an independent report from somebody like SGS Lakefield, that should be it. If they don't have that and they're talking about, well, I picked this rock up and I had it tested and it had so much large flake in it, well, you can go to a deposit and pick the best part or the medium part or you get the drift. So, yeah, as long as they have strong independent verification, then that should be fine. And they should say where the numbers came from. And if they don't, then that's a red flag.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Now, I want to move on to trigger points, notably what my audience can look forward to in terms of news flow in the near term, Greg.
Yeah, so this has kind of been a little bit of a problem for Northern Graphite for a couple of years, in that because we were early, we got all the hard work done. And, we've had a feasibility study done for a while, and we've sharpened it up with a few updates and stuff. All of the drilling is done. Most of the engineering is done. The permitting is, we have our major mining permit, and the operational permits are well advanced. So unfortunately, that by nature dictates that the news flow is going to be slower. Obviously, the big one is a partner financing to build the mine.
Yeah.
And, that's been an ongoing effort for a couple of years. And the major problem there is that the counterparties, whether they're auto companies or battery companies or whoever, they don't really have a sense of urgency yet. The kind where the price goes up, there's supply shortages, everybody panics and everybody tries to go through the same door at the same time. Mm-hmm. They're big companies, they're conservative. I spend a lot of time educating people about graphite, including auto manufacturers. And I spent a lot of time with one of them who shall remain nameless, but I said to them, based on your press releases, you need a 30 or 40% increase in world graphite production just for you, not everybody else, based on the numbers you publicly announced. So where are you going to get the graphite from? And it was kind of, well, we're working on it, but there's lots of graphite around. And then I said to them what I said earlier here. Yes, there's lots of graphite deposits. There are 20 feasibility level projects, mostly in Africa, not all battery grade and none under construction. And you have this 2025 target. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, well, we're working on it. And I don't know, I find it kind of staggering that these companies would be announcing multi-billion-dollar EV rollout plans and have no raw material strategy. And that applies to most of them. We see the odd strategic partnership or offtake agreement in lithium. So they've started cropping up, and cobalt is a big concern because of various issues around cobalt supply and cobalt production. And nobody has done a real offtake in graphite yet. And just to give you an idea of scale, Bissett Creek would produce 25 or 30,000 tons of graphite a year. We could do 80 or 100, but as I said, the market's not ready for that. So LG Chem and GM are building a battery plant in Ohio. That one plant will require all of the graphite from a mine the size of Bissett Creek.
100%.
And the same with Tesla's Gigafactory. So again, I'm not insinuating there's anything there. I'm just making the point that one factory needs one mine.
Yeah.
And so, and as of right now, they have no strategy on where that's going to come from. So, you take GM again in Lordstown, Ohio. Is that going to come from Heilongjiang, China, down to the coast, all the way around the world, land on the coast, and then go all the way across to Ohio? And that's not even talking about the political security, stability, and environmental issues. That's just talking about logistics. So it's a big problem, and the rubber is going to hit the road somewhere along the line here in graphite.
Yes. Okay. Well, so thank you for that. So, I'll wrap it up here. The macro numbers are bullish and panic hasn't set in yet, which is the equation that we as retail investors want to find. We want to spot the avalanche before it occurs and put ourselves in front of it. That's the winning formula every time. If we're looking at the graphite
market. If I could just interrupt for 2 seconds, I would add in low market cap, high quality asset.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. High quality asset, great infrastructure, 17 kilometers off the Trans-Canada Highway. To your point, 4 hours away from the Montreal port, 1 day to the northern US markets. Location's great. Infrastructure's there, contributing to your high margin business model. Greg, so anybody curious, NGC is where Northern Graphite trades. Greg, thanks so much for coming on the show, discussing the macro environment, getting into Northern Graphite's assets. I'd love to bring you back on a couple months down the road and check in on the story and see how things have developed.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Jay, and thank you all to your listeners for listening in, and look forward to speaking again.
As always, if you enjoy this content, please hit subscribe. I'd love to have you on the team. And if you want to take the next step and go a bit deeper with my content, I publish a free weekly newsletter every Friday where I debrief my portfolio. I distill the top lessons I've uncovered from the guests I've had on this show every week. And I talk about sectors and industries that I think are poised to move, areas that I'm looking for opportunity, and places that I'm allocating capital. I love writing it. We publish every Friday. The link is right beneath this video. Love to have you join the tribe.